In this video, I'm going to take a look here at some of the different components of mediation skills and those that are offered by two mediation um, experts. One is Ken Sande and the other one is Randy Lowry. And we'll take a look at what they advocate as a way in which mediators can operate. And then I'm going to just talk about some of the other um, aspects of mediation and as well when it's time to get a mediator and some common misconceptions about mediation. So what Sandy wants us to do is to use kind of an acronym he calls gospel. And so each letter in this word then stands for a different kind of aspect of the mediation process. So the G stands for getting started. And for Sunday, this is where you would invite the Lord to rule over the dispute. So you have the conflicted parties together. And before there is a discussion, before they start sharing and making their points, and people begin to kind of engage with one another, you just invite the Lord to rule over the dispute, and so that ultimately the resolution that is achieved can bring honor and glory to Him. So you also want to outline procedures, rules, expectations. People who come together for mediations may have certain conditions for meeting. And there may have been things that have been worked out that need to be expressed. You want to kind of emphasize the way in which the participants will address each other or talk to each other. Maybe one person doesn't want to be talked directly to the person they have the annoyance with or that they have the issue with, but instead talk directly to the mediator. But also kind of expectations, so the expectations that the mediator has of disputants, but also maybe expectations that the disputants have of each other and of themselves. So then the O stands for opening statements. This is where conflicted parties share a brief overview of the conflict's history as they perceive it. And it's really important to make sure that the person who is giving their perspective is not interrupted, so that each person gets to state what it is, how they saw the conflict and how it arose. And so it's important to kind of protect that person as they are going over the details as they remember it or recall it. Conflict parties also clarify what they see are the issues. So the mediator will probably need to ask questions in order to help the parties be more focused on what the issue really is, as opposed to something else that may be triggered by the issue. The S stands for storytelling. So here's where the conflict parties tell their story about the conflict and how it has affected them. So, the opening statements, parties are just kind of describing what it is that what transpired over time, but now they're getting to tell a little bit about how they felt. They may have felt judged, they may have felt dismissed, they may have felt ignored, and they obviously feel hurt or they feel betrayed. So they get to tell the ways in which these incidences has affected them, and they may have lost relationships because of it, or they may have lost potential for advancements. So sadness that they are feeling. So this is where they get to expand beyond just the details of what took place, but how those events has had a toll on them. Mediators also seeks to understand the conflicted parties' positions and interests. So again, the mediator is probably going to be asking questions for clarifications, asking questions again about why people may feel or may have responded the way in which they did, and try to get more information about what interest they have in resolving the conflict. Problem solving. So this is where the mediator leads the conflicted parties towards collaborative and creative solutions. So there may have been some times when the conflicted parties have tried to um, offer solutions, or what they thought was solutions. Maybe they've not been talking to each other at all, or maybe they have talked and offered solutions. Neither one of them like the solutions the other one has offered. So the mediator may be there to help them through a process of thinking more creatively about other types of solutions. And it is focused on the parties arriving collaboratively at solutions rather than the mediator being the one who just starts listing the solutions. So the mediator might perceive what he or she thinks is the best solution, but they need to restrain offering that and instead keep kind of asking the questions that will allow the parties to come up for themselves with the solution that they think may have a chance of resolving the conflict. The E then stands for end result, and that's where the conflicted parties will agree to the solutions and reconciliation. So just agreeing to a solution is not reconciliation. That is, you might approve of what someone will decide to do or what the different parties will decide to do. But reconciliation is moving towards treating each other with respect and with consideration and with grace. So, not only that you're going to adopt the solution, but that you are also going to adopt the kind of behaviors or views of the other person that are in accordance with God's will for his people and God's will for those who exist as a part of his kingdom. And then finally, love. Love is reconciled parties then commit to a stronger future that's characterized by love. And so they're, um, this is a part of that reconciliation, what they're um, agreeing to do in the future. And then this idea of practicing love with each other. So that's a kind of ongoing. The mediation really is not finished just when the hour or the session has ended, but it's ongoing. So that's a sketch here of the Ken Sande's approach. Now turn to the Randy Lowry's interest-based conflict management strategy. And by interest-based, he's really trying to focus on how people who are in dispute can get beyond the kind of the surface issues that are brought up and try to dig down, as it were, to the deeper interests that are motivating people towards some kind of solution or resolution. And he makes a kind of a contrast between what he calls a positional conflict management style. This is where parties attempt to change others' perspective on the issues, and they'll offer reasons, rationales. They may even bargain with the other person. But basically, one party is trying to change another party, or both parties are trying to change each other on the way in which they view the issue. Positions in this kind of style often comes more solidified and extremed when perspectives are not changed. So different people say, well, you ought to see it this way, another person, you ought to see it this way, and they continue to perpetuate a demand that the issue is viewed in the way in which one party sees them. And when that doesn't happen, then people just get more entrenched. And then what happens is parties' relationships become damaged. People begin to trust each other. Maybe have resentment. And the chances of a resolution really begin to decrease. So for Lowry, he wants to contrast this positional conflict management style with what he calls interest-based conflict management style. And this is where parties attempt to go below this line of the issue. So you have the issue that's right there on the surface, and you're trying to dig deeper into discovering what really is something the parties are interested in. And they're probably this issue is somehow or another related to what that interest is. So what you have to do is you have to separate the issues from the interest, so that you can set those issues to the side and just focus on interest and ways in which a person's interests can be achieved. Now, this may not be able to happen in all situations, but in many situations, you can separate those two, because what's what is put forward as an issue is not really the issue. And so trying to dig into those interests and allow those interests to be seen and dealt with. Parties then search for creative solutions for satisfying everyone's interest, because now they hear what the interests are, not necessarily how to view an issue or have one person's perspective of an issue validated as opposed to another. So what Laurie sees are the advantages of this interest-based conflict is developing better, more satisfying agreements rather than just agreeing to adopt one particular solution, because people think that what they're really interested in is actually going to be pursued. Also is creating greater commitment to the agreement, because people are more likely to commit to decisions or solutions that they see are really treating their interests, as opposed to solutions that are merely or just superficially addressed towards the interest or to the issue. Also, it helps to strengthen the parties' relationships. So, parties in dispute oftentimes have damaged relationships, and even though a solution might be arrived at through other means, one party may feel like they have been undermined or manipulated or pushed to give in, and so the relationships can be damaged. But if both parties are heard what their real interests are, and their interests are taken seriously, and the desire is to really try to address those interests and to do something about those interests, get those interests fulfilled, then parties can continue to trust each other and draw closer and strengthen from each other. This also creates greater organizational effectiveness, because organizationally, as people are related not only to each other but also to other aspects of the organization, because their interests are going to be pursued, they then talk about this situation. They then contribute to the organization because they think that they are being supported, as opposed to if they have to cave in, if they have to adopt a solution that doesn't really satisfy their interest, they as well may pull back from the organization. And so for Lowry, the interest-based conflict is more effective for treating the organization as a whole. So some of the techniques that they advocate is you want to keep the conversation on substance, but you're going to be gentle on people when they aren't focused on the substance. So very oftentimes, while the conversation is going on, people will sometimes want to talk about other issues, other topics that are not directly related to the issue and the interests that are at hand. And so it's the job of the mediator to keep making sure that the disputants will come back to the issue that brought them there. We're always seeking reasons behind positions, so you have to keep asking the why and the how questions. Why is this important? How would one achieve something? So those two questions, keep asking the why and how to the people in dispute, the disputed parties, helps towards that clarification. Listen for the unstated. So sometimes people will say certain things, but sometimes it's what they're not saying about issues or about interest that the mediator has to try to perceive may be there, and may have to work to get them stated. So listen for what's not stated. Brainstorm all possible options. So brainstorming does require some skills. When you brainstorm, you want to make sure that you're not spending too much time in defining or delineating, explaining an idea. In brainstorming sessions, you're really just wanting to rapidly have one idea put out after another without going into details of what it might look like or what the problems might be. Sometimes people think brainstorming is just someone shoots up an idea, other people talk about that idea, then somebody else shoots an idea, people talk about the idea. Instead of talking about the ideas, you just are listing lots of different ideas. And then later on, you can come back and begin to unpackage those ideas and weigh out the pluses and minuses. But you don't want to do that until sufficient amount of time has been given so that all kinds of possible options have been laid out on the table. Develop options to see which are realistic. So as you then see a whole bunch of different solutions, different possibilities, which ones have strengths and which ones have the weaknesses. So which one begins, there may be several that are realistic. So you're going to have to choose which one is going to be pursued, which has maybe the best chance of dealing with everybody's interest. Narrow choices, so to those that are the mutually beneficial. So lots of them may be realistic, and brainstorming, you might have some very unrealistic options that are suggested, just what one person might just think is crazy, and there's no way that they're going to go for something. But as you're working through these different ideas, you're trying to narrow them down so that those where both sides can say, if we did that, I would get what I'm really looking for. And you're going to aim for what Lowry calls the satisfaction triangle. And by satisfaction triangle, there's really, think of a triangle that has three sides. And in order for a solution to be satisfactory, three parts of a conflict have to be satisfied. That is people, processes, and issues. So people's, feelings and the way in which they perceive how they have been treated have to be satisfied. There needs to be obviously a satisfaction about the issue that has been raised, but also the process, the way in which you arrived at that resolution, arrived at that solution, that there is a satisfaction with how you arrived at that conclusion. So all three really need to be dealt with. All three need to be addressed in order for a much more long-lasting solution or long-lasting resolution to take effect. So, question about when is it time to actually bring in help? When should an organization seek a mediator? Well, you probably will want to do that when both parties refuse to talk directly to each other, but both parties would still be interested in reconciliation. Now, it may happen that some parties don't talk to each other and they have no interest in reconciling at all. Well, it's going to be very hard to mediate when a person or persons don't have any interest to reconcile. But if they still have a desire, they would like it, or at least they say they would like it, then mediation is a possibility. When parties have talked repeatedly to each other but have come to an impasse, so it's not that they're not talking to each other, but they just know that every time that this issue comes up and they talk, they each just continue to see things differently, and they don't seem to be able to come to some kind of solution that would be mutually beneficial. So that's that impasse. It's when parties have made considerable movements towards reconciliation, but desire solutions that are well thought out and want a mediator to lead them through that process. So, conflicted parties might have an idea. I think that if we did, this particular thing, we both get what we want. But let's just make sure that this really is the best option. So they might bring in a mediator to help see if there are other solutions they hadn't thought about and might actually increase the benefit that each side is looking for. Also, when parties need help to address underlying issues, because sometimes people might see how an issue is resolved, but sense that there are other things that need to be addressed that aren't really being addressed with this issue. Or they may be concerned that there are other interests that haven't been expressed while a particular issue has been worked on. Or when parties want to achieve more creative outcomes. So it may be that just instead of just the resolution itself on one particular issue, they may be looking for what types of solutions might lead to other benefits, not just for the parties involved, but for other groups or the organizations. So they're looking for more creative ideas. All right, I'm going to end here with some common misperceptions about mediation, what mediation really isn't. Mediation, sometimes people think mediation can resolve the differences of the parties. Not always the case that mediation can do that. Sometimes mediations might be able to arrive to resolutions, but the parties can have lots of differences between each other that do not get resolved by mediation. That mediation can avoid conflict. So some people think that you get the mediator in and that's the end of the conflict between the parties. Well, actually, sometimes mediation may bring up additional conflicts, and or conflicts can still occur even though parties are involved in mediation. So it's not accurate to say that mediation always or usually avoid conflicts. But mediation is non-adversarial. And by this I mean that the mediator should never, some people think that the mediator should never speak to any of the parties in any kind of critical adversarial way. Well, that may not be the case. Sometimes a mediator might have to address one of the parties adversarially because the party is not acting in good faith to the agreements that they had made upon entering into mediation. Or, the mediation itself may seem quite adversarial between the two parties. So someone might enter into mediation and think, okay, I'm now not going to be attacked. Well, even though people agree not to attack and maybe agree to a certain kind of tone when talking with each other, it's no guarantee that that's not going to take place. So mediation can be adversarial either by the parties involved or even by the mediator. That mediation is an alternative to litigation. So sometimes both can run simultaneously. People may have to follow processes to litigate a particular issue, but there are also other interests that need to be addressed, and mediation can help parties that are involved in litigation to find reconciliation. Just because you are reconciled may not mean that the litigation ends, so it's not simply an alternative. Sometimes people go through mediation and they can't get to a resolution, they can't get to a solution, and the next step may be to either arbitration or eventually to litigation. So mediation shouldn't be just seen as the alternative to litigation. And mediation is successful. Parties learn to like, trust, and agree with each other. Well, that you might desire for the parties to like, trust, and agree with each other, but you can be successful even if parties, when they disperse, after a solution has been um, thought of um, and agreed to, um, you could still have the parties not really liking each other and partly not trusting each other. They're going to have to trust each other over the solution that has been arrived at to pursue. But there may be other areas that parties are not going to trust each other. And so they're not always going to agree with each other about everything. They should, for the solution, going to have to agree to the solution, but there's lots of things that they may not agree with each other over. And mediation is where everyone sits around a big table and negotiates. Well, that's not exactly what mediation looks like. You don't have to physically be behind a building, and you don't have to physically always be in each other's presence for some mediation, parts of mediations too. And it may not be so much negotiation as if you're trying to work towards interest, you're not having to bargain. You're not having to give up certain things. So it's not about negotiating. And a mediation needs a third-party facilitator with technical expertise on dispute issues. You don't have to have that kind of technical expertise. Maybe technical expertise can be quite advantageous and can help avoid certain pitfalls, but mediation certainly can take place even when the third-party facilitator doesn't have that expertise or technical expertise. All right, I think I will end this kind of a quick sketch of some of these other aspects of conflict resolution and some of the processes that happen.